Thank you for all. Thank you for all being here today. I know how difficult it is to kind of focus on anything other than what's going on at the moment. And on the other hand, I think that, and I found in the last few classes I've done this today, that being able to kind of take our heads away from everything that's happening and be focusing on Torah and ideas and something outside of it is super important, and also in some senses allows a bit of normality back into a very not normal situation. Some of you I'm recognizing and I'm loving seeing your faces, and some of you are new. Wonderful to see you all. What I think we're going to do is once we've established the group and people have signed up, we will then we'll go around, get to know everyone. I'm not going to do that this week because I'm going to just open the class. I know there's some people who are trying it out, some people who are not sure they're staying, some people who have registered, who haven't registered. It's also being recorded for people who are going to listen afterwards. So this week I will, obviously you can open up your microphones at any time. This is going to be a reading group. I'm going to split the class into 3. For the first 5 minutes now, I'm going to explain exactly what the class is, what the aims of the class are, what's expected, and what I'm going to need from you, and what you're going to get from me. The second part of the class today is I want to share a couple of ideas with you related specifically to what we're going through at the moment. I feel that we can't jump into something until we've kind of given space and been conscious of what we're going through. So I'm going to spend 5 or 10 minutes just unpacking a couple of ideas, specifically actually of Rabbi Sacks, on the situation that we're in at the moment. And then the third part of the class, we're going to have an introduction to Rabbi Sacks, understand who he is, which we're going to continue next week, understand who he is, what we're doing, why his thinking is important, why we've dedicated an entire class to his thoughts. So I want to begin first and foremost by just outlining, explaining what the class is about. Those of you, there were a few of you that I can see that I know were in my class in Jerusalem last year, where we began thinking and looking and really understanding Rabbi Sacks' thoughts. What we're doing, what I hope that this class on Zoom will be, and despite the fact that it is on Zoom the whole year, so even if you're not, don't even live in Israel, people who can live abroad, whoever it is, you're all welcome. This is a purely Zoom class. It's not a hybrid class. And we are going to be together. I hope we're going to establish a really strong group where we are going to come and dedicate ourselves weekly to meeting. What we are going to be doing in this group is, as opposed to some of my other lectures, for example, on Tuesday, I give a lecture in Renana, which is hybrid. It was also on Zoom, but that's more very much me lecturing. This, I'm hoping, is going to be more dialogical. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that what I'm going to be asking you to do is to do reading. I'm going to be telling you, and I'll explain to you in a minute, we're going to be beginning with one of Rabbi Sacks's books, one of his kind of more recent books, because we already have looked at a few of his other books last year, but one of his more recent books we're going to be looking at, and a book that I think is particularly poignant for us at the moment, called The Home We Build Together. Rabbi Sacks's Yortzite's coming up on the 3rd of November in a few 2 weeks' time, and the campaign, which I think at the moment has also kind of been halted, but the campaign that they are putting forward for Rabbi Sacks' Yortzeit is called The Home We Build Together, which is named after one of his books. And it really is talking about how we can establish a society, how we can establish a home together. Now, he specifically is addressing the topic when he wrote to Britain, because he was speaking to a British audience. However, the basic underlying concepts in the book are highly applicable to Israel and basically to any community, any society. And that's why they've given the Yortzeit this year the title of The Home We Build Together. So to take one step back, the aim of the class is for us to be able to engage in dialogue, I will obviously be channeling, I will be introducing the ideas, I will be outlining, as I did last year, also the philosophical concepts that underpin his thinking. I will be showing you and pointing out how we must read his books, asking questions like, what is the agenda of the book? What is Rabbi Sacks trying to give over to us? We're going to be trying to understand Rabbi Sacks's thought. Who is he influenced by? What are the philosophical schools of thoughts that are informing his writings? What is the Jewish context? When is he writing, and what is the context? What is he grappling with? What issues is he addressing? These are all things that we're going to, and then one of the major questions, one of the major things we're going to be asking is, how do we take this book that perhaps, books we're going to be looking at were written maybe 2 decades ago. How do we take these books and how do we infuse them with meaning for us today? Now, one thing I would say about Rabbi Sacks's writing is that question is never, ever difficult, because almost everything that Rabbi Sacks writes has some eternal message in it. It's quite unbelievable. And we're really going to be understanding and addressing that. So that's the aim. The aim is that we are going to have our microphones open in the sense that anyone can speak at any point. We're going to be able to, we're going to be able to have dialogue together. I want people to be reading. My aim is that I will be giving you specific chapters in the book. I would like people to go and buy the books if possible. They are all books. We're going to be addressing books that are available that you can buy either online or at your bookstore in Jerusalem or Renana or wherever it happens to be. And the aim is that we're going to be reading these books together. We really are going to be a reading group. As I said, I will be channeling it, I will be explaining it, I will be showing you how to read the books, but the aim is for us to read the books together, to come prepared and to engage in the dialogue and engage in the discussion that we're going to have. So that's the outline, that's kind of practicalities of what this class is and what the aim of the class is. The second thing I want to do today is I want us to open first and foremost and say, I'm speaking for myself. I know that our reality at the moment is almost unbearable, almost impossible. It's almost impossible to think past tomorrow, past the next hour, to try and manage what's going on in our houses, and at the same time know that we're trying to give to other people outside. And I want to share with you a few thoughts. They're thoughts that I've shared with my other classes today. So those of you that happen to have been in my other classes, I apologize if there's a slight crossover. But I want to share with you a couple of thoughts that I've had over the last few weeks, last week and a bit. First and foremost, I really believe that there is a time for everything. Those of you that know me know that the way in which I teach is that I don't see things in a black and white way. I'm very much about the gray. I'm very much about the ambivalence, about the nuance. I'm very much about the complexity of ideas and the complexity of truths and the complexity of what we hear and what we see. But I will say that something rang so true for me in the last few days. And I keep hearing the words of Kohelet, et leharov, et lisnoa, et milchama ve'et shalom. And I think that there are some things, yes, there are many things that are complex and gray, and there are many things that are nuanced, and there are many things that we don't necessarily always have an answer to. But I think in the last week, we realize that there are some things that are black and white, some things that are good and bad, some things that are, I would say, good and evil, and some things that are really right and wrong. And we, in the last week and a half, have seen the face of pure bad. We have seen the face of pure evil. We have come face to face with our modern day Amalek. And what I want to say is that despite the fact that generally speaking, I see the world in colors, I really have been seeing this particular reality in black and white, as I know many other people have. And I want to ask the difficult question: what does it mean to come face to face with Amalek? How do we fight that? How do we fight an enemy that only wants our destruction, that comes and attacks from behind, as we know Amalek does, the weak and the weary, the children and the women? How do we fight such an enemy? And I want us to look at the first time Amalek comes to attack us. We've just come out of Egypt. We're weak, we're slaves, and we are vulnerable. We really are vulnerable. And just before Amalek comes to attack us, we ourselves are in a place of chaos, in a place of Meriva. The place is called Mei Meriva. We're in a place of antagonism, of argument to God, to Moshe, to each other. And we ask, Hayesh Hashem b'kilbenu, is Hashem amongst us? Is Hashem within us? Are we seeing that Tselem Elokim? Do we understand that we have Tselem Elokim with each one of us within each other? Are we seeing? We're asking, are we seeing the Tselem Elokim, the divine, the divinity within each human being? And then Amalek comes and attacks us. And how do we fight Amalek? ויבוא עמלק וילחם עם ישראל ברפידים ויאמר אשר יהושע בחר לנו אנשים וצא לכם בעמלק מחר אנוכי ניצב על ראש הגבעה ומטה אלוהים בידי. Moshe is told by Hashem, and he tells Yoshua to go and choose people you are going to fight. And Moshe says, I will stand at the top of the mountain with God's stick in my hand. ויעש יהושע כאשר אמר למשה להילחם בעמלק, ומשה, Aaron וחור עלו ראש הגבעה. Moshe and Aaron and Hur go to the top of the mountain. And when Moshe raises his hands, the people are successful in their battle. And when Moshe's hands go down, they are not. And Moshe's hands are kvedim, v'yadei Moshe kvedim, v'yichul emem v'yasimu tachtav, and they put a stone under him to support him. V'Aaron v'Hur tamchu b'yadav, and Aaron and Hur supporting his arms. Mizeh echad u'mizeh echad, v'hi yadav emunah v'o hashemesh. From one side and one side, and his hands were the hands of emunah. His hands were the hands of what we would call today faith. And I asked the question, what does the Torah mean when the Torah says that Moshe's hands were the hands of faith? Is this like faith in the way that we understand it, propositional faith? Is this faith, I believe in God, or I believe X, Y, Z? What kind of faith is this? And I would argue that this is classically the faith of the Bible, of the Torah. This is what we call covenantal faith. This is faith as trust. This is faith as loyalty. And the Mishnah and Rosh Hashanah asked the question, did Moshe's hands make or break war? Were they miraculous? Did they make or break war? And the Mishnah answers that in a very naturalistic way, no. It wasn't a miracle. It was just the fact that when Moshe's hands were raised towards heaven, the soldiers on the ground looked heavenwards. They understood that there was more to reality than just what they were seeing in front of them, just the battle they were fighting. And when his hands were down, they looked downwards and they only saw the here and the now. And I think that what Moshe's hands represent are what we would in modern day language call today morale. The morale of an army. And how do you infuse energy into the morale of an army? How do you ensure that the army fighting on the ground have their eyes upwards, keep their morale high? And the answer is very simple. They need to recognize that there is a mission, that there is a goal, that they are part of something bigger than themselves, that there is something that they are fighting for, that they are part of a long history that came before them and a long future that will come in front of them. And more than that, Moshe's hands are heavy. To keep the morale of an army going is tough. And we need people holding us up on every side. And that is why I say today, when I have friends that have been reaching out to me from Chutz La'aretz, and they say, I feel useless, I feel there's nothing I can do. And I said to them, just by messaging me, you're doing something. Just by messaging people in Israel, you are keeping their morale high. And then when we are home, trying to keep our kids have a semblance of routine, or we are ourselves trying to keep ourselves boosted, we are doing something as well. And when we do one small thing, whatever it happens to be, we are keeping the morale high. That is what it is to support each other. We are in this together. And I remind you of another battle at the end of Tanakh against Amalek, the battle of Megillat Esther, when once again we are faced with someone who wants to totally destroy us for no other reason except for the fact that we are Jews. And the people of Israel once again have kind of got muddled up, have got mixed up, have forgotten why they're there, have negated their Jewish identity. And Mordecai, the only person who retains his Jewish identity, comes and he shouts out and he says, I'm a Jew, and he tears his clothes when he hears the decree, and he shouts in the streets when he hears the decree, and he goes to Esther, who is hiding in the king's palace, and he says to her, go to the king, and she turns around and she says, well, I haven't been called to him for 30 days, I can't just go to the king. And Mordechai turns around to her and says, will you block your ears to the call of God, of your people? Will you ignore the fact that your people's lives are on their line? If you do not listen to the call today, you will be destroyed. But I promise you, says Mordechai, your people will be redeemed. In the same way that when we fight Amalek, it says that we fought Amalek ad ba hashemesh, until the sun arose. The sun will rise up again. We will defeat our enemies. Amalek will be defeated. God will send us salvation. We will win the war. However, if you at this moment don't take responsibility for your people, if you don't recognize that it's something much bigger than just you, you won't be part of that. I think that we have heard today an unequivocal yes from the people of Israel to the question of, are you part of the covenant of fate? Those of you that were with me last year will remember we spoke a lot about the influence of Rav Soloveitchik's essay, Fate and Covenant on Fate and Destiny on Rabbi Sacks, called Odid Ofek and Rabbi Sacks. And we spoke a lot about the fact that Rabbi Sacks was deeply influenced by Rav Soloveitchik's idea of the covenant of fate and the covenant of destiny. And we even looked to the essay of Rav Soloveitchik in order to understand how deeply it touched Rabbi Sacks and how much we saw it in so many of Rabbi Sacks's writings. Rav Soloveitchik in 1956 wrote an essay, and he said that the people of Israel are tied together with bonds of fate. But if that disappears, there's nothing. And the truth is that in the last few years here in Israel, and I voiced this in quite a few of my classes, and we discussed this in this class that we had last year many times, and we questioned the idea of the covenant of fate, that thin line, that thin bond that we have as Jews, where we see each other still as dignified Jewish beings. Is that still alive and kicking? And we question that. And many of us were despairing. And I want to say that when Amalek did attack us, there is no question that that covenant of fate is alive and kicking. Jews everywhere in Israel and all over the world have unequivocally turned around and said, we are loyal. Yadei emunah, we are the hands of faith, and we are with the Jewish people. And I want to finish just this part of the class by sharing with you what I think is really, really phenomenal. And I'm bringing it for you because there are those of you that already saw it when we studied Radical Then, Radical Now together as a class, but I want to bring it to you again because I want to remind you of it. I want to remind you of what Rabbi Sacks says about his own journey. And the turning point for Rabbi Sacks was the Six-Day War in 1967. We're going to talk about it in a minute when we go through his biography. Rabbi Sacks was a traditional Jew in England, and he was very academic, went to Cambridge to study philosophy, very much part of the mindset of the 1960s. And all of a sudden, while he's in Cambridge, Israel goes to war. And this is what he says about that time. He says he saw people who he didn't even know were Jewish, people in the university, lecturers, all of a sudden coming out and fighting for Israel. And this is what he says. He says, for I had witnessed something in those days and weeks that didn't make sense in the rest of my world. It had nothing to do with politics or war or even prayer. It had to do with Jewish identity. Collectively, the Jewish people had looked in the mirror and said, we are still Jews. And by that, they meant more than a private declaration of faith. Religion, in the conventional sense of the word, it meant that they felt part of a people, involved in its fate, implicated in its destiny, caught up in its tragedy, exhilarated by its survival. I had felt it. So had every Jew I knew. Why? Why? Why does he ask? He felt this allegiance to a people, this hacharesh tachrishi be'etz hazot, if you block your ears. And then I forgot the main part, by the way, which I totally forgot. What does Esther say to Mordechai? This was the climax. Clearly, my brain isn't functioning as it should have been. What does Esther say to Mordechai? ultimately, once Mordechai says to her, you know what, you need to take responsibility. And she turns around, she says, I am going to go to the king, I'm going to go to Achashverosh, but lech knos et kol hayudim, go and gather all the Jews. To my mind, that is what's happening today. And that is exactly what happened, as Rabbi Sacks describes beautifully in 1967, that all of a sudden the Jews came together. Jews that had been hiding, Jews that had tried to cover up their identity. And what does he say? He says, it was then that I knew that being Jewish was not something private and personal, but something collective and historical. And then being part of an extended family, many of whose members I did not know, but to whom I nonetheless felt connected by bonds of kinship and responsibility. It made no sense at all in the concepts and categories of the 1960s. That was when I first realized that being Jewish was an exceptionally odd thing to be, structurally odd. Jewish identity was not simply a truth or a set of truths I could accept or reject. It wasn't Yadei Emunah. It wasn't faith as 13 principles, even as the way the Rambam says. It wasn't faith as a doctrine of faith. No, it was so much more than that. It was not a preference I could express or disavow. It was not a faith I could adopt or leave alone. I had chosen it, but it had chosen me. Everything I'd studied in modern philosophy, everything I'd experienced in contemporary culture told me that truth was universal and all else was individual preference, personal preference, autonomous choice. But what I had experienced was neither universal nor individual. Jewish identity was not, nor did it aspire to be the universal human condition, nor had I chosen it. It was something I was born into. How can anyone truly be born into specific obligations and responsibilities without their consent? And he continues, I'm going to skip a bit. He says it logically doesn't add up, but psychologically it did. What does he say? He says he realized he belonged to a people and being part of the people he belonged. And he discovered that in 1967, in those emotional days of that summer, he discovered that Jewish identity is alive and kicking, that the covenant is alive and kicking. And what he explains is that Western philosophy and Western thought gave us this idea that nothing binds us, right? That we're not connected to anything in the past, we're not connected to anything in the future. We choose who we want to be in any given moment. And he says, however, this is not what Judaism is, and this isn't what he experienced. And he says as follows, we enter this long cumulative development has left us with the belief that identity is something we choose, unfettered by any bonds with the past. No fact denies our obligations, no history prescribes our roles. We enter the world with a clean slate on which we can draw any self-portrait we wish. Against this whole complex of ideas, Jewish life is a sustained counter-voice. To be a Jew is to know that this cannot be the full story of who I am. We are not free-floating atoms in infinite space. We are letters in the scroll. I am a Jew because knowing the story of my people, I heard their call to write the next chapter. I did not come from nowhere. I have a past. And if any past commands anyone, this past commands me. I am a Jew because only if I remain a Jew, will the story of 100 generations live on in me. I continue their journey because having come this far, I may not let it and them fail. I cannot be the missing letter in the scroll. I can give no simple answer, nor do I know of a more powerful one. And I want to add here that the stories that have come out over the last few days of a generation that I think sometimes we kind of gave up hope on. We kept talking about that generation, do they have loyalties? They're so postmodern, going to India, doing, whatever, they're not dedicated. Oh my goodness, were we wrong? What an incredible generation. What an unbelievable generation we have that threw everything on the floor wherever they were around the world and came back to their people to fight in their army, even though they know they're putting their lives on the line. Look at even the youth in the generation before, in the age before they go into the army, how much they're doing, how much they're just going out there, and all they want to do is to give and to volunteer and to be part of their people. There's something profound, and I think in so many ways, what the last week has shown us is that actually there is hope for the Jewish people. Actually, we are all part of the covenant of fate, exactly as Rabbi Sacks described happened to him. And I want to finish this with something that was shared on I'm part of the Sacks scholars, and something that was shared on this group, which they said they're going to put up onto the website shortly, it actually came from a Facebook post that Rabbi Sacks wrote to, I think it was a letter that he wrote to someone in Israel, one of the dignitaries in Israel, I'm not 100% sure, during the 2015 wave of terror in Israel. And it is so relevant. It could have been written today. Listen to what he wrote. You haven't seen it yet because they haven't shared it on his website. But this is what he wrote. He says like this: what do you do when terror strikes? When all sense of security is lost? When you feel yourself surrounded by hate? When the voice of reason is drowned out by the clamor of rage? And when all hope for the future seems lost and the world around you has turned dark? That, they told me, is how it has felt to be in Israel these past few days and weeks. As I heard the anxiety and even despair in their voice, I thought of all those lacerating words from the book of Psalms: from the depths I've called you, I am peace, but wherever I speak of it, they are for war. Oh my God, why have you forsaken me? I heard an echo of King David's sense of betrayal. I said rashly, all people are liars. Are there other words that can help us make the journey from darkness to light? And as I was listening, I suddenly felt a voice, as if from the collective unconscious of our people, saying, we are Am Yisrael. The descendants, not just of Abraham, the iconoclast and Isaac, the almost sacrificed child, but especially of Jacob, Israel, because Jacob had one extraordinary strength of character with which he endowed us, his children. Jacob was the person whose deepest encounters with God took place when he was alone at night, far from home and fleeing from one danger to the next. That was when he had a vision of a ladder stretching from earth to heaven and said, truly the Lord is in this place and I did not know it. This is the man who, under almost identical circumstances many years later, wrestled at night with an angel and was told his name would be changed to Israel, meaning one who wrestles with God and with man and prevails. Jacob never lived in peace, but somehow he took all the fear and pain and loneliness and isolation and turned them into a vision of heaven and found God in the very midst of that place and moment of danger. Jacob was the man who rescued hope from the depths of despair, and who kept going despite his fear of Esau and Lavan, despite even the loss of his beloved son Joseph, and who never stopped wrestling with history and destiny. This is the man who somehow endowed us, his descendants, to the end of time, with an inner strength that is almost beyond belief. Ours is the people that empires tried to destroy, yet we outlived them all. The people often hated, but who did not repay hate with hate, and instead of cursing the darkness, lit a light that became an eternal flame. This is why the Jewish people became the voice of hope in the conversation of humankind in generation after generation, and a compelling testimony to the power of life to defeat the forces of darkness and death. To be a Jew in whom beats the spirit of our ancestors and the hopes of generations to come is to feel the pain and yet carry on, to know the fear and to refuse to be intimidated, to be surrounded by hate, and yet to have the courage not to answer it with hatred in return. These are among the supreme achievements of the human spirit, and it is to them we are being summoned now by every syllable of our history. The fear is real and the pain is deep, and yet that faith that carried our ancestors will carry us as we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, into the light of the promised future that still awaits us, when an anguished people will finally know peace, the last of all our blessings, but still the greatest speedily in our days. This is the moment when the prayers of all Jews, like a single person with a single heart, are with the people of Israel in the land of Israel, the people in the land that give us so much strength and pride. Let us be strong and strengthen one another until the city whose name means peace at last becomes a true home of peace. With you, with all my heart, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. So I think that is an unbelievable message of hope for us, coming literally from the grave. It's unbelievable because it is so poignant and so reflects exactly what we need to hear today. And with that, I'm going to now open up our course.
Where is this posted? I mean, is it in the notes or?
It is. I will send it to you now on, I'm going to add it now to your chat and then you can have it. Okay, you've got it now on the chat. You can download it from the chat. Okay. And I know it will be posted on the Rabbi Sacks website in the coming, maybe even in the coming hours, but definitely in the coming days. I want to say that why have I chosen to do Rabbi Sacks? Let me just give a little bit of background. First and foremost, Rabbi Sacks was my teacher. Rabbi Sacks was my rabbi when I lived in London. I grew up listening to Rabbi Sacks when I was a student, when I was a teenager in Bnei Akiva. Rabbi Sacks used to come and speak to us in the Bnei Akiva Bayit. When I was a student in university, I would go to hear his lectures in town. He used to do a series of faith lectures that I went to hear. I met Rabbi Sacks on numerous occasions personally. He channeled me both career-wise and personally. And the last conversation I had with Rabbi Sacks was actually just before I was going to start my doctorate, which was about 7-8 years ago. And I sought his advice, I should say. And I asked him whether this was the right time. You know, I was a young mother, lots going on in my life, but I really felt that a doctorate was something I wanted to do for myself. And his answer was and now I look back, at the time I don't think I even realized, but now I look back, I realize his answer was an expression of everything Rabbi Sacks was as a leader. He turned around to me and he said, it was a phone conversation because I was living in Israel, he was in England and didn't know when he was coming. And he turned around and he said to me, Tanya, he said, I can promise you, he said to me, Tanya, you must do a doctorate. That's what he said to me. He said, but I can promise you that whenever you choose to do it, and I can't tell you when to do it, he says, whenever you choose to do it, you will grow from that doctorate. You will become a different person. Your horizons will be, expand. He says, but I will tell you one thing. He said, the choice has to be yours when you do it. I can't make that choice for you, but I can tell you that whenever you choose to do it, don't stop teaching. That's what he said to me. So it shouldn't be at the expense of your teaching. And I realize now with hindsight, as I look back, what he was essentially doing was he was handing the baton back to me. He wasn't telling me, he wasn't giving me an answer. He was actually almost kind of encouraging me to find the answer within myself. And at the same time, he was giving me the tools, the almost the imperative to continue being an educator and continue being a leader and understand that the doctorate is a means to an end and not an end in itself, because the end is to educate and everything else is a means to that end. And what was phenomenal for me was that I did do the doctorate. I decided to do it then. And another time when a few weeks into the course and when we start discussing more Rabbi Sacks, I'll explain a couple of other things that he said to me personally. But one thing I will say is that I was struggling with what he said to me. And especially because at one point during my doctorate, when I was coming towards the end of it, I realized that I would have to take a sabbatical, that there was no way amongst many personal challenges that I was having at the same time, illness in the family and bringing up small kids, that I was going to be able to finish writing the doctorate without taking a sabbatical from teaching. So I decided that I would still heed Rabbi Sacks's message and I would keep one class, only one class. And I would basically spend the rest of the time finishing my doctorate. And what happened that year? Corona struck. And that one class that I was meant to teach, I ended up managing to teach all of my students. Everyone came onto that one class. And I kept thinking and that was also the year Rabbi Sacks died. And I kept thinking to myself all the time, how did he know? How did he know that there was something so crazy in the fact that I actually managed to do what he told me to do without even planning it? And for me, it was just a moment of lucidity, of realization at what an amazing leader he was. So that was my personal encounter with Rabbi Sacks and what he was for me. But even more than the personal encounter, I would say that Rabbi Sacks's writings have informed my thinking on a very, very deep level. And what I want, the aim of this course is for us to engage in those thinkings. Many of us have read Rabbi Sacks' Covenant and Conversation. Many of us have read his Parsha commentary, but there's not that many people who really fully engage with his books of philosophy, with his books he wrote that have philosophical underpinnings. Number one, they're longer. Number two, they require more energy. Number three, sometimes people feel a little bit intimidated to pick them up. Number four, some of them are just difficult. His earlier ones in particular that we did last year are difficult. So the aim of this reading group, and I have another reading group of Rabbi Sacks' thought also on a Thursday morning in person in Ra'anana, the aim of these reading groups is for us to be able to really gain a deep appreciation of Rabbi Sacks, a deep appreciation of his thoughts, but to do it together so that it's not intimidating. And more than that, to be able to really unpack it, to really understand what's going on, to really appreciate the depth and the breadth of what Rabbi Sacks is telling us. So let me begin with an intro. We're gonna unpack a little bit who Rabbi Sacks was, why his thinking is important, what is novel about his thoughts and what he is, and really try and understand Rabbi Sacks the person. So let me share my screen again. Just give me 1 second as I change it over. Okay. Just 1 minute. Okay. So I brought you a quote. So long as the Jewish people never stop learning, the Jewish heart will never stop beating. Never has a people loved a book more. Never has a book sustained a people longer or lifted it higher. And Rabbi Sacks is clearly talking here about the Torah, about Tanakh, about how important learning is. And I was going to say, which I didn't say earlier, when we were speaking about fighting Amalek and we were speaking about Yedei Emunah, and Yedei Moshe, Yedei Emunah, I really believe, and this is what I'm dedicating our learning, every class that I'm teaching, I'm dedicating, obviously, to those in the army, to those who are fighting, to our soldiers, to those that need a refuah, to those that are kidnapped and need to be returned, to anyone who is facing not just physical ill health, but psychological and mental ill health, because this definitely affects everybody. Everybody is in our thoughts, and through our learning, we are the Yedei Emunah. We are helping the morale. We are, please God, increasing the love, increasing the knowledge, increasing our insights to Torah in this world. And this is what Rabbi Sacks is saying. The book has sustained us throughout the centuries. Another beautiful quote, which I use so often because I think it is just so profound, comes from the book, The Great Partnership, a book I hope we will be looking at this year. It's a book in which Rabbi Sacks grapples with the idea of science and religion. This is what he says: the meaning of life. Why are we here? Okay, very often I hear people say to me, okay, what's the point? Why are we here? Listen to what Rabbi Sacks says. The meaning of life is the realization that you are held in the arms of a vast presence, that you are not abandoned, that you are here because you were meant to be. It is the sense that life is something you have been given so that you live with a feeling of gratitude and you seek to give back, to pay it forward, to be a blessing to others. This presence in which you live knows you better than you know yourself. So it is no use pretending to be what you are not, or denying your shortcomings, or justifying your mistakes, or engaging in self-pity, or blaming others. It is a loving, forgiving, challenging presence, demanding much, but never more than you can do. It asks you to give your best, not for the sake of rewards, because that is what you are here on earth to do. I prepared this sheet a long time before I knew about this war. I can tell you that. But one thing I will tell you is that reading this again, I think about so many people who have turned to me and said, I'm just keeping my head above water. I can't do more than that. I'm seeing all these people organizing this, organizing that, sending this, sending that. I can't do it. I'm just keeping my family and my family's heads above water. And I'm telling you that that is what you can do. It asks you to give your best. And we're all giving our best. And we're all doing it because we believe and we know that we are being held in the arms of a vast presence, and we are aligning ourselves with that vast presence. And we are saying we are part of this. This is what the meaning of life is. And this is another quote also from the Great Partnership. Faith is not certainty. It is the courage to live with uncertainty. Faith is never easy. The great heroes of the moral life, like great artists and scientists and thinkers, like anyone who has undertaken to live a life of high ideals, know failure after failure, disappointment after disappointment. What makes them great is that they refused to despair. The sheer wonder that God could take the risk of creating a creature with the freedom to disobey him and wreck his world. There is no faith humans can have in God equal to the faith that God must have in humankind to place us here as guardians of the vastness and splendor of the universe. We exist because of God's faith in us. That is why I see in the faces of those I meet a trace of God's love that lifts me to try and love a little as God loves. I know of nothing with greater power to lift us beyond ourselves and to perform acts that carry within them a signal of transcendence. Again, I can't add to it. I just think it's such a profoundly beautiful quote about what faith is. And that to me, and again, I prepared this long before the previous thing I shared with you, that to me is what Yadei Emunah is. Yadei Emunah is the idea that God has faith in us as much as we have faith in him. When the people ask Hashem, Hayesh Hashem b'Qalbenu, is God within us? What they're really asking is, do we have the power to save ourselves? Remember at the beginning of Parashat B'Shalach, the people, come in front of the Red Sea and there's no one to save them. And they cry out to God. And what does Moshe do? Stand still, Yeshuat Hashem. Stand still and God will save you. At the end of Parashat B'Shalach, God mandates us with salvation. We're the ones who have to fight Amalek to save ourselves. God is telling us, you're not slaves anymore. I'm not coming to save you. You need to, why? Because you have Hashem within you. You have Tzelem Elokim. You have the power. You have the ability to bring salvation for yourselves. And that salvation is inside and outside. It's against an enemy, but it's also against the enemy from within. It's also our ability to save ourselves from within. Rabbi Sacks always talks about faith as covenantal faith. And we're going to talk about this a lot this year. What is Jewish faith? It's not faith, it's not Christian faith, it's not dogmatic faith. Jewish faith is what we call covenantal faith. And covenantal faith is when there is a trust in ourselves and our abilities of being B'Tselem Elokim, being in the image of God, of being created as dignified beings, of created beings, of people who are able to save themselves as much as anything else. And then at the same time to have the humility to recognize that there's a bigger picture, that we're doing this in partnership with God, that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves. It's a very fine line. That's what Jewish faith is. So now I get to the question, why learn Rabbi Sacks's books? Why not just listen to a series of Rabbi Sacks's lectures on video, on camera, on TED Talks? Why engage in his books? Today, we live in a very... we live in a world of what I call, a fast food world, an instantaneous world. We live in a world where we want to have things very quickly and very easily. In fact, so much so I see very often adverts pop up for what they call, I don't know what it's called, but like basically that instead of reading a book, right, you can listen to like 10 minutes sound clip. Oh yeah, the advert is be the cleverest person in the room. Okay, that's the advert. And they basically said, do you want to be the cleverest person in the room? You don't need to read the book. Just listen to the 10-minute podcast or whatever it is, summarizing the book and the main ideas of the book, and then you'll be the cleverest person in the room. That's the world, unfortunately, we've got into. Okay, a world in which everything is instantaneous. And if it doesn't come quickly, it doesn't have value. And that's why, to me, Rabbi Sacks's books are supremely important. Because what we have in those books is wisdom that can't be gained in a second like this. Don't get me wrong. I think it's still super important to have those 10-second videos out there, Rabbi Sacks with quotes. I think it's super important to have those short sound bites, to have those short extracts, because not all of us want to be sitting reading, and not all of us can sit and read all the time. But equally, I think they shouldn't come at the expense of investing time and energy into reading his books, because there is nothing that beats reading in depth about a subject. You cannot match that in any other way. And this, in Rabbi Sacks's words, are why you need to read his books. Listen carefully to what he says. This comes, and by the way, I've given you the link. I think you can actually link into it from the PDF. Let's just see. Yes, you can. You can link into it from the PDF. Hold on. Can you see my PDF still, or you went into the link? Can you see my PDF now again? Someone? Can you see my PDF again? Yes? Okay, thank you. So you can click into the link later and watch the whole thing. It's fascinating. It's actually one of the last meetings that Rabbi Sacks had before he passed away. It's with a think tank of journalists, non-Jewish journalists in England. And this is what he says. It's absolutely fascinating. He says, someone asks him, why do you write books? Why don't you just go and lecture, right? This is what he says. He says, I'll tell you exactly why I write books. When I was a kid, I learned to speak in public. In those days, I could do it quite well. I could really move a crowd. And I thought that was the most dangerous thing I knew, because you can move them to truth, but you can move them to falsehood. You can move them to love, but it is a lot easier to move them to hate. You can move them to feel threatened. You can move them to paranoia. I cannot begin to tell you how easy it is. And it made me ill. I still speak publicly, it's what I do. But I decided I'm not going to do this any longer as the carrier of what I have to say to people. I'm going to set it out in print with sources, with footnotes, with qualifications, wherever I feel appropriate, and say, now here it is. I'm not trying to persuade you of anything. Just read it on your own and tear my arguments to shreds. That's why I wrote the book. And that is the difference between what the Greeks used to call philosophy and sophistry. And that's why I write books. If you really, really want to engage with Rabbi Sacks's thinking, you have to read his books. He says it himself. And that's why, to me, these reading groups that I've set up over the last 2 years are my pride and joy. I'll be totally honest, because I feel that I am fulfilling Rabbi Sacks's legacy in the way that he wanted it fulfilled, in the sense of reading his books, engaging with his books, arguing against his arguments, and showing the background of what he is talking about. I want to now very briefly look at a biography of Rabbi Sacks. 8th of March, 1948, Rabbi Sacks is born. His parents were Louise, who was a businessman and sold fabric in the East End, much like my father, Zichrono Livracha, my grandfather, also both sold fabric in the East End on Brick Lane, and Louisa Libby Frumkin, who worked in a family's wine business. The family grew. Jonathan became an older brother to Brian, Alan, and Elliot. Both parents were active as volunteers in their synagogues. They were modest means. They instilled an enormous amount of devotion to his education and Judaism, etc., etc. He attends a non-Jewish school, St. Mary's Primary School in Finchley area. Then he attends Christ College School in Finchley. Again, didn't have any formal Jewish education, even though, as it says here, half of the students were Jewish. He then enters Cambridge University in 1966, focusing his degree on philosophy and moral science. While at Cambridge, and this is the turning point, remember we read earlier that Rabbi Sacks in 1967 is kind of a major turning point. And we hear it, by the way, it's not only in his book Radical Then, Radical Now, it's also in his book Future Tense, and it's also in one of his covenant conversations as well, where he speaks at length about 1967 being the absolute turning point in his life. And what happens after 1967 is that summer, he decides that he is going to visit the United States for 2 months. He wants to meet 2 of the greatest Jewish personalities of the world at the time. And he goes to meet Rav Soloveitchik and the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. he goes to meet the two of them in America. And he has a fabulous, which we're going to see in a minute, because I brought it for you, a fabulous account of his meeting with both of them, but specifically with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So he goes there, and we see that the Lubavitcher Rebbe really is the one who, in a sense, is the springboard, is the impetus for Rabbi Sacks going to seek rabbinic ordination, which is what he does. In 1969, he's given first-class honors and degree in moral science and philosophy. In 1970, he starts research in moral philosophy under someone called Philippa Foot, a very, very well-known British philosopher. In 1970, he gets married to Elaine, and they have 3 children following that. In 1971, he's already appointed lecturer in moral philosophy in Middlesex Polytechnic. Okay, so which already shows you his academic prowess. In 1972, he earns a master's. In 1973, he's appointed lecturer of Jewish philosophy at Jews College London, now the London School of Jewish Studies. In 1976, he receives rabbinic ordination from Jews College. In 1978, he's appointed the rabbi of Gold's Green Synagogue. And in 1981, he receives his doctorate, his PhD in collective responsibility from Philosophy and Theology Department of King's College London. In 1982, he becomes the chair of modern Jewish philosophy at Jews College at London School of Jewish Studies. And in 1983, he's appointed rabbi of the prestigious Marble Arch. Now, I want to just show you that here on my shelf, you can see it. I have, and we're going to be addressing, I'm going to be sending you some of these as well. I have what was the Le'ela journals. Everyone see them? Okay, so I was very kindly, my neighbor who had many of them on his shelf, gifted them to me after Rabbi Sacks passed away. And they're from, the 1980s, most of the 1980s and 1990s. They are jewels, because Rabbi Sacks wrote essays here. He was the editor of it for quite a long time. But not just that, even before he became the editor, we have very, very early essays in there from Rabbi Sacks. And some of them are unbelievable. You can already see, and I bought some last year, I bought for the class a few of them to show you that already in those very early essays, you have the seeds of what Rabbi Sacks' thinking was afterwards. Now, as we go on, okay, I'm going to explain to you more and more, but as we go on, what I'll explain to you is the type of philosopher Rabbi Sacks was. There's 2 kinds of philosophers. There's a philosopher, a thinker, whose thinking fundamentally changes as time goes on. Okay, they're an evolutionary thinker, meaning their philosophy in their younger age is totally different to their philosophy in their older ages. And then there are philosophers who, from the very beginning, have certain principles and certain thinking that remains stable throughout their entire life. And what happens is that we see, according to the needs of the time, or according to certain conditions, the philosophy is written, adapted to that condition, but the seeds of the philosophy remain the same. Rabbi Sacks is of the second genre. Rabbi Sacks' philosophy, you can pick up something he wrote in the 1980s, and you can already see the seeds of his last book that he wrote, Morality, before he passed away. It's quite unbelievable. So that I already want to show you that already in the 1980s, when he's appointed principal of Jews College, okay, and he's a visiting professor of philosophy in the University of Essex, etc., Rabbi Sacks already is writing, and a lot of his writings we find in these journals. Okay, 1991, he's named the chief rabbi. He becomes the chief rabbi of the Hebrew Congregation of the Commonwealth, and the 6th chief rabbi since the role was formalized in 1845. He follows in the footsteps of his predecessor, Rabbi Emanuel Lord Jacobowitz. In 1998, he's named a visiting professor of theology and religious studies at King's College. Okay, so he becomes a professor at King's College. And there's a lot that happens in between. And in between, he publishes tens of books and many, he speaks constantly on the BBC and all different places. There's a lot that happens in between, but we're just kind of showing what's happened, okay? 2013, he steps down as chief rabbi. When he steps down, he's appointed professor of Judaic thought at New York University and professor of Jewish thought at Yeshiva University, and he goes and he lectures very often in America. He receives the Templeton Prize, one of the most well thought of prizes in 2016. And in 2020, the 7th of November, Rabbi Sacks passes away. I want to share with you a few biographical notes. Okay, these are really, this is not so much his philosophy, but for us to understand who Rabbi Sacks the man was, a few of his memories, and I thank Rabbi Alex Israel for sharing some of these with me last year. I've added to them. I want to just show you here a few things he talks about: his childhood, his upbringing, who he was, where he comes from. Listen to what he says. He says as follows: my father was a simple man who lived by simple truths. Here he's talking specifically about his father. He had a hard life. He came to the West as a child, fleeing from persecution. He had to leave school at the age of 14 to support his family. When I was young, I used to ask him many questions about Judaism. His answer was always the same. Jonathan, he used to say, I didn't have an education, and so I do not know the answer to your question. But one day you will have the education I missed, and then you will teach me the answers. Could anyone have been given a greater gift than that? He was a proud Jew, and he wanted his children to go further than he could along the path of faith. Here he tells another story of his father. Once when I was a child, my family were on holiday in a little, and this is so an amazing story, especially for us today. My family was on a holiday in a little coastal town south of England. It was Shabbat. We had just left the synagogue and walking back for lunch. Behind us, another member of the congregation came rushing up and pointed to the yarmulke I was wearing. He said to my father, your son has forgotten to take his yarmulke off. Those were the days when it was not done to wear overt signs. It is not the done thing to wear overt signs of your Jewishness in public. The old dictum, be a Jew at home and a man in the street, was still in force. By walking down the road with my head covering, I was committing a solecism, and our friend from the synagogue assumed, not unnaturally, that I was unaware of it. He meant it kindly. It was simply trying to save me from embarrassment, much as if my shirt tail had been hanging out. For once, my father got angry and replied, no child of mine will ever be ashamed to be Jewish in public. And we continued on our way. It was not a very tactful response, but it taught me, as perhaps no formal lesson could never, ever be, to not be ashamed of who I was. And we know that Rabbi Sacks gave his life, really his life, to the cause of Judaism, to the cause of Israel, to being the voice. Oh, don't know what just happened, that I stopped my share screen. It didn't work anymore. Hold on a second. It's very odd. One sec. To being the voice of Judaism, never ever denying his Judaism, never being embarrassed of his Judaism. And I think that was a very informative moment for him when he was growing up. Alan Sacks, his brother, who lives here in Israel, this was an interview with Alan Sacks in Makor Rishon translated. He said like this: in the living room, Alan shows me a family holiday. This is the interviewer, okay, of Alan Sacks. Family holiday picture at the seaside. Jonathan, age 16, is dressed in formal attire. He wasn't like our friends or other siblings. He never played cricket or football, but was occupied in debating and politics. From a young age, he saw himself as an intellectual and would wear a suit for school. These were the 60s in Britain, but Jonathan didn't grow his hair long like other teenagers, though he did listen to the Beatles. I thought it was quite a nice kind of anecdote. And here, this is what we read already. Okay, we read this earlier just before. Here he talks about 1967. I'm just going to read you the beginning. We read the last part. I want to just read you the beginning part. It happened in the never-to-be-forgotten summer of 1967. I had just gone to university, living home for the first time. Until then, I had been a Jew because, well, that is what my parents were. I did what I did without asking why. I had my bar mitzvah, I went to Hebrew classes, and every Saturday I went to synagogue with my father. There was no reason not to, no reason to rebel. Cambridge was like a revelation. Here, for the first time, I could feel the law of another history, the siren call of a different culture. Everything about it was dazzling. What mattered was critical intelligence, the ability to question everything, accepting no answer on the basis of authority or age or tradition or revelation. Reality was confined to facts and inferences. Everything else was choice. You could be anything, do anything intellectually and existentially. My parents' world seemed long ago and far away. These were heady days, and I was at the heart of it. Then in May, we began to hear disturbing news from the Middle East. It was then an extraordinary thing began. Throughout the university, Jews suddenly became visible. Day after day, they crowded into little synagogues in the center of town. Students and dons who had never before publicly identified as Jews could be found there praying. Others began collecting money. Everyone wanted to help in some way to express their solidarity, their identification with Israel's fate. Jews were riveted to their television screens or radios, anxious to hear the latest news, involved, on edge, as if it was their own lives that were at stake. The rest is history. The war was fought and won. It lasted a mere 6 days, one of the most spectacular victories in modern history. We could celebrate and breathe safely again. I had witnessed something in those days and weeks that didn't make sense in the rest of my world. It had nothing to do with politics or war, even prayer. It had to do with Jewish identity. I'm going to stop here because we read the rest a lot at the beginning of the class. As I'm reading it, I'm praying to God that one day we will also be able to write exactly those words. Jews were riveted to their television screens, anxious to hear the news, involved, on edge. Their lives were at stake. And the rest is history. The war was fought and won. Please God, we will be able to write that in time about this period too. But that's Rabbi Sacks, and that for him was a moment of shift, a moment of change. And then here he speaks beautifully, and I think this is beautiful. He speaks very often about Elaine and about his marriage. And this is a few extracts from that in his TED Talk, which, by the way, I encourage everybody to go and watch. Watch Rabbi Sacks' TED Talk. It's one of the most brilliant TED Talks there are. It's one of the most brilliant videos there are of Rabbi Sacks. And in his TED Talk, he says like this: once upon a time, a very long time ago, I was a 20-year-old undergraduate studying philosophy. I was into, you should hear him saying, because he's in his own words, says it's so brilliant, Nietzsche and Schopenhauer and Sartre and Camus. I was full of ontological uncertainty and existential angst. It was terrific. I was self-obsessed and thoroughly unpleasant to know until one day I saw across the courtyard a girl who was everything I wasn't. She radiated sunshine. She emanated joy. I found that her name was Elaine. We met, we talked, we married, and 47 years, 3 children and 8 grandchildren later, I can safely say it was the best decision I ever took in my life, because it's the people not like us that make us grow. And that is why I think we have to do just that. This came from his TED Talk, which was about the idea of the we and the I. It was about the idea of how we move from an I-centered morality, which is the thinking of enlightenment and all the moral philosophers of the early 20th century, to a we-centered morality, which is a morality of the other, which is a morality in which we see the other. That's what he speaks about in the TED Talk, and he uses the example of his relationship with Elaine and how he met Elaine to show what he's talking about. Again, we're going to be unpacking and addressing all of these ideas, and also addressing all the philosophical underpinnings of these ideas that allow us to understand really what Rabbi Sacks talks about in his books, especially in his book Morality and many other books that we're going to be looking at along the way. There's a beautiful interview, which again, I really encourage you to go onto the website, Rabbi Sacks' website, and read the full interview, but listen to what he says in the interview. And it's very, very eye-opening about Rabbi Sacks, the man. He says, I have a persistent lack of belief in myself. There's some kind of pain, which is perhaps an inherited thing. There's a sadness in Jewish music, a kind of minor key that I heard when I was 2 or 3 years old. It's an existential sadness that I can't eliminate however hard I try. That's probably what allows me to communicate with people who are unhappy. Elaine is the balance in everything. When I was going through difficult times as chief rabbi, she was stable. It's not easy being the child of somebody in the public eye, and she was the source of strength and confidence that our 3 children needed. Elaine is joyous, positive, always finding the good in people. She is the world's finest antidepressant. I thought that was so profoundly beautiful and also very, very insightful into Rabbi Sacks, the man. And finally, he speaks here about his honeymoon. And here, this isn't just about his marriage. This is also about a moment in Rabbi Sacks' life, which I think really honed in for him what really morality is about, what Jewish morality is about. Listen to what he says. It happened on our honeymoon. We had hitchhiked from the Swiss mountains to the Italian coast, finding ourselves at a little town called Paestum. Don't know what that is, an ancient place with fine Roman ruins. But it was the beach that drew us to it, and the sea. Rarely had the sea seemed more inviting. I'm really sorry. I'm just going to have to mute literally for 1 second. Apologies. But it was one second. Rarely had the scene seemed more inviting than just then. There was just one problem. The Talmud tells us that one of the duties of a parent is to a child is to teach it how to swim. Unfortunately, my parents never learned that page, and I never learned how to swim. But as we sat on the beach and looked across the water, I realized the shore must be sloping very gently indeed. People were far out into the sea, and yet the water was only coming up to their knees. It looked safe just to walk out. And so it was. I walked out to where I had seen people standing a few minutes ago, and the water gently lapped against my knees. Then, as I started walking back to shore, it happened. Within a minute, I found myself out of my depth. How it happened, I'm not sure. There must have been a dip in the sand. I missed it on the way out, or I'd walked straight into it. I tried to swim. I failed. I kept going under. I looked around for some possible source of rescue. The other people were bathing were a long way away, too far to reach me. I thought too far even to hear. Besides which, we were in Italy. I didn't speak the language, didn't know how to make myself understood. I was sure this was the end. And as I went under for the 5th time, I remember thinking 2 thoughts. What a way to begin a honeymoon, and what's the Italian for help? It's difficult to recapture the panic I felt. Clearly someone rescued me, or I wouldn't be writing now. But it did at the time seem like the end. As far as I reconstruct that moment in my memory, I had already reconciled myself to drowning when someone, seeing me thrashing about, swam over, took hold of me and brought me to the shore. He deposited me, almost unconscious, at the feet of my wife. I was too shocked to do or say anything. I never found out his name. Somewhere out there is a man to whom I owe my life. It changed my life. For years afterwards, I would wake up in the morning conscious of the fact that for a miracle, I would not be here. Somehow that made everything easier to bear. Our life has had difficult times. It has moments of crisis. Public life is full of stress, and not everyone who lives it has thick skin. People often ask me, how do you bear it? The answer is simple. That day on an Italian beach, I learned that life, which I so nearly lost, has been given back to me. It's difficult to feel depressed when you remember fairly constantly that life is a gift. And I'm going to stop here for a second and say, as I was reading that, I kind of welled up because I was thinking to myself, this story is the basis of so much of what Rabbi Sacks says in his book on morality, where he speaks about the idea and the need for the other, where he speaks about the idea that in order for us to build a society that works, we have to have the other as part of that society. And all I kept thinking about as I was reading that short extract was how absolutely altruistic people have been over the last 10 days. But more I was thinking about those people who just picked themselves up and went and faced death in the south to rescue other people on that day, on that Shabbat. And all I keep thinking about is how lucky we are, what a gift we've been given to be able to say we are part of the people, but also to be able to know when to ask for help. And here I'm even talking about the international community, that Israel is able to turn around and say, we are in a crisis, we need help, and that's okay. And that's okay. And I think there's something so profound about what Rabbi Sacks is saying here. We cannot live alone. Now, I have to tell you something, and we're going to get to this book. In fact, I can't remember if I need to check if we did it last year or not. I don't think we did. We do future tense last year? We did. Okay. So we're not going to get to it this year because we did it last year. But I will bring some things, because if you remember, we had a debate last year. Do you remember those that were there? Maureen, Marcy, Ellen, I'm looking at all of you that were there last year. We had a massive debate last year when we were reading future tense. Do you remember? Because in future tense, Rabbi Sacks provides a very kind of optimistic picture of Judaism, where he kind of says, he negates that kind of narrative of anti-Semitism, the narrative of, they're all out to kill us and we need to kind of create this sense of that we're on our own. And we really struggled with it. Remember? I see Maureen smiling. Remember? We were struggling with it. In fact, I'm even thinking we're going to come back to that book, even though we did it last time. And the reason why I feel like we need to come back to it is because I think it's even more complex today. It's even more complex today when, on the one hand, everything Rabbi Sacks said in that book, all the optimism that we're in a different era and we're strong and we're part of Israel and we can open our hands up to people on the outside and invite the other to be part of, our Jewish narrative and to show that we don't have to put our borders up and we don't have to be in survival mode. That was Rabbi Sacks' message. And on the one hand, we can argue after last Shabbat, what are you talking about, Rabbi Sacks? We have to always be in survival modes. We are alone. We are fighting this. And on the other hand, there's something profound that's happened in the last week that showed me that actually we're not alone. But actually, sometimes we do need to put out our hand and ask for help from other people, and that other people are responding to that hand that we've put out. And there's this kind of ambivalence when I'm thinking about the book Rabbi Sacks wrote, Future Tense, about what is the narrative that we can adopt today. So perhaps maybe we will go back to that book, not the whole book, but maybe we will go back to elements of that book and try and understand what he's saying here. But this really, to me, when I was reading this, I understand where Rabbi Sacks is coming from. I understand that that moment in his life where he knew he was going under if it wasn't for the help from someone from the outside. And he says that that's where a redemption comes. A redemption doesn't just come from looking internally, also from looking externally. And here I want to share with you what I think is, and with this, we're going to finish with what I think is, I'm just thinking, we're going to finish with this, excellent, because we finished then this. No, there's two more things I want to very briefly read with you. The first is his meeting with Rav Soloveitchik and Lubavitcher Rebbe, and what an impact and how basically that changed the trajectory of Rabbi Sacks's life. And the other one is what he speaks about fearing death. Let me read what he writes about Rav Soloveitchik and Lubavitcher Rebbe. He writes this in his book, The Great Partnership. The Great Partnership, again, is his book about science and religion. He says, Rabbi Soloveitchik, and this, by the way, happened, again, as I remind you, in the summer of 1968, I think it was, the summer of 1968, when he goes to America. Rabbi Soloveitchik, formidably erudite in every branch of philosophy, spoke about the need to create a new kind of Jewish thought, based not on philosophical categories, but on halacha. This is his meeting with Rav Soloveitchik. Law was the lifeblood, the DNA of Judaism, and it was more than mere regulation of contact. It was a way of being in the world. Jewish philosophy in the past had based itself on its Western counterpart, and in so doing have failed to express what was unique about Judaism, its focus on the holy deed. For 2 hours, he spoke with an intellectual passion and depth, far beyond anything I had experienced in Cambridge. My encounter with Rabbi Schneerson was unlike any other. The first half of our conversation proceeded conventionally. I asked the questions, he gave answers. Then unexpectedly, he reversed the roles and started asking me questions. How many Jewish students were there at Cambridge? How many were actively identified with Jewish life? What was I doing for them? This was something for which I was not prepared. I was on a private intellectual quest with no larger intention. I was interested in my Jewish identity, not that of others. I began my reply with a typical English evasion. In the situation in which I find myself, the Rebbe allowed the sentence to go no further. You do not find yourself in a situation, he said. You place yourself in a situation. And if you place yourself in one, you can place yourself in another. We were losing Jews, he said, and each of us had a responsibility to do something about it. Years later, I summed up that moment by saying how wrong people were to think of him as a leader with thousands of followers. A good leader, I said, creates followers. A great leader creates leaders. The Rebbe created leaders on a scale unprecedented in Jewish history. These were life-changing encounters. Rabbi Soloveitchik had challenged me to think. Rabbi Schneerson had challenged me to lead. I am actually going to finish here today. And the reason why I'm going to finish here today, because I think it's taken us full circle back to where we began. We began when I said to you that we are in a moment of a covenant, of the renewal of the covenant of fate of the Jewish people. We are in a moment where Jews all over the world, here in Israel, our youth, here in Israel, our soldiers, here in Israel, our people have responded to the question, where do you find yourself? Question Rabbi Schneerson asked Rabbi Sacks. We don't find ourselves in a situation. We put ourselves into a situation. It's not by chance we're here. It's by intention we're here. And that, to me, is what created Rabbi Sacks into the leader and what created him to create more leaders. Rabbi Sacks did exactly what he said Rabbi Schneerson did. Rabbi Sacks did not create followers. Rabbi Sacks created leaders. The people that he influenced are people who are now leaders. People worldwide, not even just in the Jewish world. And that is, from the very small, anecdote I gave you about my encounter with Rabbi Sacks, how he motivated me to take my future into my own hands and to not ever give up teaching and to continue to be who I needed to be. That was just one small, tiny window into how Rabbi Sacks did that. But my point is that at this moment in our history, a moment that is we are living through a moment in history that will be written about for centuries to come, that our people will look back on for centuries to come. And this is the moment in which In the same way, Rabbi Schneerson said to Rabbi Sacks, where do you find yourself? Don't ask where you find yourself, ask where you put yourself. In the same way that Mordechai says to Esther, you, who knows if for this reason you came to kingship? Who knows why this is happening? We don't know. We may never know. We may never understand. But what we do know is that it is a call for each and every one of us to ask ourselves, what is our calling? And if for some of us it's getting through the day, then it's getting through the day. And if for some of us our energies are able to do more than that and to help in any way we can, if for some of us it's sending a message to someone we know who is suffering and saying to them, we're with you, whatever it is, that is the way that we are connecting, by standing with Israel, by being with Israel, by saying we are part of the Jewish people, and our future is our people's future. That is our moment. And that is what Rabbi Sacks is calling us to do. So next, I'm sorry, we haven't had, this has really just been a monologue today. I apologize. This is not how it's going to be usually. I'm going to ask Matan to open up the microphones now for anyone who has any questions or any comments. The classes are going to be far more interactive. Just next week, we're going to continue a little bit more. I'm going to finish off the introduction. And I ask you all, please, the first book we are going to read, that we are going to be looking at, is the book entitled The Home We Build Together. For those of you that are going to be taking this course, and for those of you that are signing up for the course, I ask you, please, if possible, to purchase this book. I will not be sharing like we did in the past all the extracts. We're going to be doing the book together. What I will be doing is, once we have established a group and once everyone has signed up, I will be telling you which chapters of the book to read. For now, if you want to get ahead, okay, I would like you please to, obviously, if you can read the whole book, then fantastic. But if not, I would like you please to read the introduction, chapters 4 and chapters 5 and chapters 7. Okay, that's the beginning. Chapter 4, 5, and 7 of The Home We Build Together. And I will be sending out through Matan questions to help you to think, questions to think about while you're reading the chapters. So that I will, God willing, send through already this week for those that already want to get ahead and start reading. And for everybody else, if you're still trying the class out, if you still want to decide, that's absolutely fine. We definitely have another week where Matan are giving the classes for free for you to be able to try them out. So I look forward to seeing you all next week. Is there anyone that wanted to add anything, ask anything, make any comments? Yeah, Ellen. Hold on, let me see if...
Oh,
Yeah.
I can do it. Do you, any idea what other books we'll be reading this year? It's just harder to get purchased books than it used to be.
Okay, so what, first and foremost, I know that for sure, there's a shop in Jerusalem that sells a lot of these books. What's it called?
It's called Pomerantz. It's called
Pomerantz.
Pomerantz.
That's right.
Pomerantz
Pomerantz,
usually
okay.
has them, and if they don't, they can definitely get them, so it's worth checking with them.
Okay.
What I will do is Bli Neder, okay, providing I am able to find the time, I'll try and do it this evening.
General.
I will send, let me just tell you that I think what I would like to do is like this. I want us to first do The Home We Build Together. I think it's a super important book. Depending on what our situation is, I think I would like to revisit Future Tense. We're not going to read the whole book again, because I know some of you already, we did it last year. I would like to revisit it and to look and maybe have maybe 1 or even 2 classes discussion about it. Following on from The Home We Build Together, the books I know that I definitely want to do with you this year are The Home We Build Together. Let me just hold on a second. I'm going to tell you, if you just give me 2 seconds, one sec. The Great Partnership. Definitely is going to be a book we're going to do, Not in God's Name. And I hope we'll be able to get onto morality as well. Those are the books I intend to do this year.
Thank you.
Okay. I really, really
Thanks.
hope we'll be able to get through all of them. That's my aim. My aim is to be able to get through
Right.
all of them. What we will be also doing on top of looking at those books is I'm going to be sending, and again, once we have an established group, my aim is to create a WhatsApp group. And that will make it a lot easier for me to send you out extra articles or extra things that I want you to look at. Sometimes, for example, when we look at the Great Partnership, there's a couple of videos I want you to watch in preparation. So once we've got an established group over WhatsApp, it's much easier for me to send you out all of that homer, all of that, all of those things that need to be read and whatever, and we'll do them. But I would, if you want to start reading, definitely begin with The Home We Build Together.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hold on, Anne, I'm going to unmute you. Can you try and unmute yourself? For some reason, I can't unmute you. Yeah.
I'm muted now. you hear
Excellent,
me?
I can hear you.
If you're having trouble getting books in Israel, I just Googled Amazon Prime. I can get them delivered to me in New Hampshire and turn around and mail them to you for your
Oh, that
students.
is so, firstly, thank you. That's great to have you on Zoom with us. Fabulous.
So,
And that's really, really kind of you.
So you can let me know. And I just Googled The Home We Built Together. I don't know how many copies you need, but if you want, I can order those today. I don't think Amazon Prime can send directly to Israel, but if they send
No,
to me,
I don't think Amazon Prime definitely can't. I think you can get Amazon, but at the moment, to be honest, I don't think we can get much here.
no, I can try and get them to you, but
No,
you
there
can
is
give me a head
nothing
count.
being shipped here.
I-
Planes
Yeah, that's part of the problem.
planes are not
Deborah,
landing
yeah.
here.
I
I
know.
just checked also, it's free shipping, so I was planning to order them also, but to get them shipped here.
Okay, so let's see if we, I
So
think,
if you can't get
Anne,
it
thank you.
there,
I
I
really,
might be
really
able to get
appreciate it.
someone to bring them.
Yeah, that's probably better because the shipping is probably going to take longer.
Tanya,
I can work on it.
Tanya,
I would check, those of you in Israel, I would check with Pomeranz first, because I do know that they had quite a few. For my previous reading group in Renana that we did last year, and there was a group of about 30 people, we ordered all the books from Pomeranz. So just double check with them. Yeah. Someone just, yes, Steinmatsky have his books in Hebrew, they for sure have. I'm not sure how many of his English books, but it's worth checking with them as well.
Hevruta also has everything, but the prices are usually a lot higher than what you can get on Amazon.
Can you put do you have the website, Deborah, that you can put on the chat?
It's a store in Katamon.
Ah, okay, fine. Okay, so
There's another bookstore that we use for our book club that we want to give them. Many of the small bookstores are having difficulty financially, and we support a book club called Adraba, and they often have Rabbi Sacks's books. Adraba is in Rehavia.
amazing, Tamar. Okay, this is brilliant. Thank you all so much. I'm super excited to learn with you all, super excited to have the dialogue together. And God willing, we will meet again next week on Zoom. If there's other people who you know who haven't come into the Zoom who do want to join, it's not too late. They can definitely still join. Tell them to come in next week. There's a recording of this they can watch. So just be conscious of that. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Please, God, you should have a safe week
Good
and
news.
a good week. And
Thank you very
everyone
much.
just look after
So
yourselves and
Tovot.
be kind to yourselves. I'm
Mhm.
trying to tell that to myself as well.
Thank you
Easy-
very
easy
much.
to- Thank you.
Thank you. Inspirational as usual.
Be safe.